This quote up here that hopefully you've looked at in the meantime. Paul Brock, great book. He's an executive in the Director General's office in New South Wales Department. Had a long career in education. In 1995, he was diagnosed with motor neuron disease. He's still going strong, which is rare, one of the longest survivors with that affliction. And this book he wrote in 2004, after he'd had it for about 10 years, and is nearly getting 8 years old now. He's still going strong. And that was like an epitaph to his daughters. I can't think of a better bookend for many of the things that we do than that one. I'm going to cover a fair bit today, so I'm going to see how I go. Like often when you have a lot of things to do, you either do them poorly or you cover them quickly, so we'll see. First thing I want to do is talk about context. Now, you all know that I talk about rural contexts a lot, and that won't change. I do that because it's an obvious point of difference. Socially, we can always pick out a rural area versus an urban area. We can ascribe certain ways of being to people from rural communities as opposed to metropolitan, cosmopolitan communities. It's a gross social generalisation, but one that holds true with the way we ascribe identity and meaning. And I can see Meg's look on her face there about that, because I won't mention Ceduna other than now. In the first week, I showed in a tutorial Hattie's work and had it up as one of the readings. You'll see this work, or you probably have seen this work, used ad nauseum in the whole justification for teacher quality. And it was used really strongly early on with the move towards institutes, pedagogy models and so forth. What the logic is in this public discourse is that 50% there we can't change. That's students. The 30%, you guys, we can. And we can focus on the practices that 30% does to improve the quality of teaching in schools. Fairly reasonable proposition. And while I want to both agree with that, I want to have a criticism as well. That 30% of teachers that make that difference make a difference by taking into account the backgrounds, the affordances, the life experiences that come from that 50% of students. Too often we fall into the logic that that's other social policy. We can't deal with that because that's about disadvantage, class, gender, race, ethnicity, etc., etc. And it becomes this unitary discourse about teachers make the difference, therefore we will focus on improving teachers. We will use market mechanisms, we will use coercion, we will use reward, because they will then exhibit the practices that this 30% do. Now, yes, we can improve them, and a lot of what we teach you is based on some of that stuff, but realistically, in this research, that's not the distinction. It's actually quite the opposite. But again, these things often take up lives of their own when they enter public commentary and political discourse. So you need to be aware of that. And if you haven't read Hattie's stuff in the first week or so, go back and have a look. And have a look at the way they talk about the use of those numbers. Okay. Now we also get, for example, in Australia, the bit of stats by Rowe there at the bottom, and this article by Rowe and Rowe that this relates to is again quoted ad nausea in teaching institutes to say that, well, look, you can see that the effect of the teacher is more important than the school effect. And what they say is that there's more difference between two teachers in one school, so the classroom next door, than there is between two schools. And this research is used to back that up. Now, Ken Rowe unfortunately died in the Black Friday, or whatever it is, bushfires in Victoria, but the research is really problematic. Okay? It comes from ACER, the Australian Council for Educational Research. They are a quantitative institute. They can only do stuff on what moves or what they can measure. And if it doesn't move, if they can't measure it, doesn't move, they will move it to make it measurable. Okay? And they're our peak research body that is partly government funded. The schools he looked at were in one social dynamic in East Melbourne, okay, with some generalisations to general studies in other contexts. So the data is a problem. This comes back then to some of the research and writing that you guys do. Don't fall into the trap of when you're critiquing research of saying, I don't like this because in my experience at school this was the case. We need to be critiquing research based on the evidence they use, the method they use, how they draw conclusions from that evidence and method. Okay? You guys are graduate students, you know that. Okay? Think the Britsman stuff though. We fall back into judging things on schools because of our experience rather than judging the quality of the research that informs that decision. We end up then with pedagogy models and standards and institutes. And these things all go together. Because the argument about teaching standards is they're about improving that 30% of teachers because they're based on research into what works. Taking that caveat I made earlier. What works is also in pedagogy models, similar research, but again, keep in mind those caveats. We wouldn't argue with the research that a good teacher is a hell of a lot more effective than a not so good teacher. This difference in achievement can be up to 2 years of a student's life in school. 2 years worth of learning can be the difference. So yeah, regardless of some of those caveats I mentioned, 2 years is significant. But it's about how far we take that logic and how much of a unitary discourse it becomes, which we want to be careful about. Wait, yeah, that wasn't a happen. Okay. And then I get to the thing I want to say here. One thing that hasn't changed in education since we've been studying it is the connection between social background and student achievement. This graph comes from a report on PISA, okay, international test of scientific literacy and other skills. And you can see there's a correlation line. Now, what it's showing is that as you go along the scale of social advantage, their learning changes. So that's the correlation between birth and your expected educational achievement. And in most countries, there is an angled line. So your educational outcomes are determined to some extent by birth. Hattie's work can trouble that, can sort of say we can improve that. That 90%, 30% difference is about doing things that can help break that cycle. But the more we do it, we still haven't managed to turn it upside down. Okay? You can see the flattest line there is probably Finland's, if you follow it across. Australia has one of the steeper lines. So we're not upsetting some of those existing determinants of student achievement as much as we might hope to. Okay, so that didn't come out very well in the colour. If we look at this is from the quality teaching research stuff. So we've got a model of pedagogy based on 3 major studies from Wisconsin, Queensland, New South Wales. And they're saying that where people are doing this authentic pedagogy, where they're using things that relate to the quality teaching model, or QTM here in the ACT, that, yeah, there is an improvement in student achievement. Okay? So this graph sits next to another one where the amount of learning that's occurring has improved. Okay? So yeah, you learn from that 30% in the Hattie report. You take the pedagogy model that we've been taught. You maybe use some of the stuff in the standards, and the achievement will improve for your kids. Okay? No doubt. But the gap still remains. It's not as big as it was. Okay? It's a smaller gap between background and achievement, but the gap remains. We've accepted that as being a positive and a successful outcome of these reforms. What we also know, though, is if we study schools broadly and we bring into them this social background issue, that school effectiveness, so this is how well schools move students from one level of understanding to the next, so pre and post test, large scale stuff, that there is a direct correlation between school effectiveness and social background. Remember, students don't choose the social background they come from, and they don't choose the school that then puts them in. So the answer to this, again, that you will see in public discourse and reports and so forth, is the quality of the teacher. And we now have pedagogy research and standards that show us what good teaching is. If we follow those things, that will improve. But we've got the evidence that says it closes the gap, but doesn't actually close it totally. Then I want to bring in my country example. A lot of text on this page. The key bit is in the box. Adrian Piccoli is the new or newish minister in New South Wales. New South Wales has more rural kids than any other state, hence why it's the largest example. But by virtue of where they happen to live, children in rural schools lags 1.5 years behind city students, or 40% below the minimum numeracy standard. This is where discourses need to be disrupted, because the usual answer you get to this, I think it's actually somewhere here perhaps even, is that, well, rural communities tend to have a lower SES than urban communities, and therefore this is a social and economic issue. Partly. But that's the argument. The argument stops there. It's class. Bang. Like it's too hard to do anything about it. But it's not. But even with this rural example, it's not just about class. Right? This 40% of kids are not all Indigenous kids, as the next logic of argument goes. They're mixed by all social, cultural and ethnic backgrounds. But we don't disaggregate data to the detail of the individual or little groups. We go in large numbers. And there's two forms of mixing happening here. In this one, you'll see that, yeah, this is taken from Wagga, that there is a mixing going on class background. Okay. Again, government, non-government comes into this here, but I'm not going to talk about that issue. Okay. But you can see that there's a distinct pattern there in achievement. And some people don't have the choices there or resources to make certain choices. But there's also the issue of Indigenous students, in that the choice isn't just about social background, SES, it's also indigeneity. Yes, there's an overlap between the two, not always. But the fact that these things exist becomes accepted. And schools get labelled as difficult, hard, challenging, or kids get labelled as naughty, not uninterested, disengaged, etc. But as Charlotte's talked in Ed Foundations, engagement has a lot to do with linking your teaching to the context, background, interest, knowledge, prior learnings, prior understandings of students. Remember my 1/3, 2/3 thing from weeks ago. So, what we then have with a lot of this stuff, and I'm using the rural as the example, is the argument that, well, we need to improve schools. We need to improve schools, so therefore we will put programs in to do that. Those programs will be training teachers in quality teaching, or whatever else the model might be. We will make sure they meet all the standards, and we will provide extra resources. So there's resources out there that schools get based on their background. So schools that have a lot of students from low SES schools get an extra line of federal funding called priority schools funding. Okay, so more low SES students, more funding. Okay, not a lot, but more. Nowhere near the level that the Gonski review has recommended, and in there's a whole lot of data that shows you the amount of funding they do and don't get. More Indigenous students, another stream of funding. Okay, just to top up. Country students, there's a thing called the Country Areas Program funding, where they get money based on their distance. So there's two things happening. One, if you've got a lower SES background, you get more money. And two, if you're further away from the centre, you get some more money. Okay? As if somehow that makes some difference. The logics these use in social justice theory is a distributive one. We will give you some more resources, and that will overcome the problems. It's all about resources to get maybe some teachers, or in the country example, it's to take them on a bus trip to the city to see what real culture's like. Okay? That's what it is. But they're distributive logics. They don't change the game. It's like giving people who don't know the rules of a soccer game, we'll give you nice outfits, you can go and play the game that you've never actually learnt before, you don't know the rules, and you can play whatever other school and see how you go. The outcome will be a smashing. You don't actually change the rules of the game or teach them the rules of the game. That's the problem. And it doesn't work. For example, all students on the right, this is for what? Ella in Year 7, and I've got to update the stats, but it still works. That's where all students are. CAP are the country schools, PSFP are the equity schools. For how many years have we been funding these schools? We still haven't got them equaling others. But we say that we've achieved success because they've improved. It's the same for student retention. Programs to get students to stay, which tend to be vocational programs in that in these communities, we will give you a part vocational course because trades are the peak of anything we would expect from you, and you will stay on at school. Still doesn't work. Right? It's perennial, it persists. And it persists because they argue that, well, that's just because of social background and class, we can't change that. They do in Finland and other places. They do in example schools with case studies. There was a project in New South Wales a number of years ago called the Priority Action Schools Project. And there's a report by Susan Groundwater-Smith and Stephen Kemmis where they gave these schools lots of money. Okay? I happened to be in one and ran the project in one, and we got $250,000. Okay? Some schools got up to $400,000. And the basic premise was, no rules here, guys. There was 50 of the state's most disadvantaged schools. Got the money. It's about a $20 million project. No rules. Whatever you need, you do it. So you could change staffing rules. You could change curriculum and assessment. Okay, you can do whatever. The report is a fascinating read because these schools achieved massive improvements and change. Massive. Because they could change the rules of the game. Then they take those rules and put them into broad-ranging equity projects, which then lose the distinctiveness of local responses, which then means no major change in the end. Okay. There's a finite amount of resources in education, in anything. Okay. And governments have to choose where to distribute the resources. Fundamental social democracy issue. The argument that it's just about the resources, okay, that you will see repeated ad nauseum, and saying the Gonski stuff does it, it's about giving them more resources to these schools, is uncovered as being a fallacy by this particular graph, by another report done by Stephen Lamb and Richard Teese from the University of Melbourne. Okay? Stephen Lamb, Richard Teese, top Australian authors, internationally renowned for their work on equity and school achievement. Okay? What they've got there are country schools, which are what, the green ones, and non-country schools outside metropolitan regions, which are the red ones, and their distribution of SES and achievement. There is no discernible pattern there. Okay? If it's just because country schools are poorer, or they're further away, you would expect them to be separate groupings, but they are not. Okay? That breaks that whole idea that it's just class. And it brings in a whole new one that is little understood, and it's called the spatial turn in social theory. And it's that place matters. It's that the knowledge that is relevant to kids is situated. What they know and understand, what their background is, what's relevant to them, it's local. Where we have knowledge systems that are unitary, that have come from cosmopolitan elites that say this is what knowledge is important, but that is embodied in a place, a time, a social group, and a location. We take that out to, say, country schools. We take it out to lower SES metropolitan schools where the interest isn't the theatre, Shakespeare, and physics. And we say, this is what you must know and master to achieve in schools. Knowledge is different. But we don't know how to deal with this spatial turn stuff in education, because it challenges the ontological framework on which we base the whole system. Now, that sort of work comes from people like David Smith, Grunwald, and so forth, talking about place and spatial theories and the spatial term. I'm going to bring in Basil Bernstein's idea of singular knowledges. And the idea here, singular knowledge, any of you familiar with Foucault and the idea of discourse, or perhaps Gramsci and hegemony, okay, that you might have done in your earlier studies, can be represented in some ways in these documents. I use history as an example of syllabi, because it's the one I use. In that we have a logic here that here's a knowledge you must master. Here is what good pedagogy looks like. And here are the standards that you must adhere to. And there's a little document New South Wales did that helped you meld the two. Okay? And in my contradictory life, I was involved with that document. So, but, you know, it's schizophrenic at times. But these are logics that we then send out. So we give them to you and say, here you go, master this stuff, go and do. You become cultural workers. And I don't want to get on Meg's turf from next semester too much. But you take that with you. Now, I mentioned the other week how you judge your success and your self-efficacy by this and how you use it and the challenges of doing that. What I want to talk about here is what it means for students and what it means for the way we value the places in which we teach. So I've been doing some research in this area. And we talk about curriculum as being the hegemonic curriculum. You've probably seen it in Churchill. Because it's, here's the knowledge, here's the exam, master it, get ahead, succeed. If you don't, go and have a good life farming. This is some quotes from teachers, new teachers that I've been interviewing out in country schools. So, I love these because, you know, for me the problem was the exam. Last year they made them write a story about a day at the beach. The kids haven't been to the bloody beach. But their success is based on a NAPLAN test that uses that as an example to write about. This one, I don't teach the syllabus in Year 7 and 8. Okay? The syllabus is there, they don't use it. Okay? They teach the kids. But they're agile enough and skillful enough, or in the Satoian terms, the strategies and tactics that they use to work within these frameworks, to trouble them, to mould them, to adapt them, is they know what's in the syllabus, and they know that the syllabus is a document that is about interpretation, and they take what they've got and they then do it with the kids, then they worry about interpreting it for the administration later on. But the whole professional success is based around how they use these things. Teaching standards, which talk about professional networking. How can I network when the nearest school is 100 kilometres away and the teacher is also a first year? Or in a country school, I'm always networking with the community because we do it in the pub every Friday. How do you put that in a portfolio? Know their students and how they learn. One of the whole domains there. Okay? But it uses a language and a perception of the student that is a metropolitan, cosmopolitan student, okay? Not a rural student. Hopefully you can start to see that when I say rural, I'm talking about not that same cultural group who wrote that document. or wrote those standards. Or pedagogy models. I love this. We've got a new head teacher from the city who's running around measuring soil against the QT framework to improve the quality of the school because it's one of the state's less performing ones. What is he doing? He's taking a view of quality from his metropolitan school when he got his promotion and then saying, you need to do this here. Don't work. Okay. And what happens? The guy's probably going to get stressed. Teachers won't like him. He'll go and leave, end up working in the office sharpening pencils for a while at the local regional directorate. Okay? Having not achieved much. Further to this, I've done another analysis on that whole topic. The really interesting thing is that in all these teachers I've been interviewing, I asked them early on, what's a good teacher? Their answer is uniformly. And we're going here from a couple of people that run a couple of the bureaucracies that are responsible for those documents down to first-year teachers. And they say, you've got to know the kids you're teaching and what matters to them. Universally, they say that. Later on, I asked them about quality teaching in terms of pedagogy, and they all related to the discipline. Quality teaching in history is. So there's this whole disciplinary understanding of what quality is, which is different to understanding of what matters to students in their learning. Fascinating distinction. Or, I learned QT, but don't tell me how to teach here. What's happening there is the teacher is wanting to teach a predetermined framework in a predetermined way without taking into account the kids here in front of them. Recognition that the way that they talk in the city was oh so different. One school to another. Okay. Often when teachers transfer between schools, they take, this is what the program I used, this is the resources, this is how I did it. They might even go to the school next door and wonder why it doesn't work. Right? Because everything is contextualised. The most important thing for you guys to do when you go out to your schools on this round and next round is get a feel for the place. Where is it? What's in the local community? Was there a factory there that closed down recently? Is there another government facility? What else is going on? What are the issues and concerns? That sort of stuff. I won't go on. I think that top one is pretty telling. It's frustrating because my new head teacher wants us to be like his former North Shore High School. Or this one down here, the bottom one, quality teaching and PCAP is the country areas program. So there's some staff that work with you in country schools to do stuff relevant to those kids. Okay? And imagine this, you've got two departmental bureaucrats, one about quality teaching and one about teaching country kids, who are having an argument in a staff meeting at a school because their views about what you need to do are so different. Okay? The discourse of quality is unitary. It denies place. That's why I say to you many times, you take the quality and the standards, contextualise them. Take what's good, recognise that they are research-based, but they're not to just be a recipe to go and then apply. Right? The connecting theory and practice is what you do every day in your job, but what you're starting to do when you go into schools. Right? Something you have to do for yourself because there's no other way to embody theory and practice. All right. I won't worry about that. All right. Pat Thompson talked about thisness. My wife laughed at me when I talked to her about thisness. It's a serious concept because teachers talk about this school, that school. Consultants talk about this school, that school. There are things that are unique about them. Okay? And she gives some ideas as to what they might be. That gives you some clues as to understanding the school you go and work in. Get to know the thisness of the school. What are the resources? What are the community profiles? Check out the ABS. Someone mentioned checking out my schools and the school profile. Okay? Don't stop there. What are the industries? What are the kids' interests? Does it back onto a nature reserve and they all go motorbike riding on the weekends? Okay? Get to know the thisness. Get to know the place. Okay? Don't take it as read. Don't be ambivalent to place. Okay? Ambivalence is a form of postmodern racism. Don't fall into it. Okay. Expanding the data. I'm going real quick. Australia, high equity, low quality. Right? Sorry, low equity, high quality. Overall, we go well on tests, but our social background has a big determinant on it in all schools. That's from my schools, which shows the ICSIA value, the social SES rating of all schools. Okay. There's a natural line there which shows that all schools aren't equal, coming from the My Schools website information kit, which sends a message that we accept this, but we don't. If you take hierarchies around independent government schools and selective government schools, we talk about the rhetoric of choice. That's probably the biggest lie of modern political government, is choice. Choice is a smokescreen for social advantage and a new politics of class that we have not engaged with in any great degree. The schools aren't about choice, they're about the resources of the parents. NAPLAN scores by location, they're very remote down the bottom, you know, below band 5 and below, okay? So it's not just SES, it's location. Because while rural areas might be lower SES on average, they have a mix, a big mix. Some of the most wealthiest citizens and people in communities come from rural areas, so they're part of these stats as well. Take the Australian states and territories. For you guys to know, ACT has the strongest correlation between social background and achievement, i.e. the most unequal educationally. Yes, that does include the Northern Territory. When we layer a map of disadvantage from Tony Vinson's work, the red, lots of red. And it's not all west. A lot of coastal locations are red because there's not much employment in some of those areas. Okay, and even within the city of Sydney, and ACT is down here. There's no actual map of the ACT. All right. Counter inequality. No one's thrown anything at me yet, so that's a good thing, Steve. Ayres and Dinham, and someone else, Wayne Sawyer. In '98, paper on achievement in the New South Wales HSC. Great little paper, it's on the readings. If it's one of the things you read, this one and the next one are up there for things to read, okay? Because I looked at about 17 or 18 teachers who over a number of years have got great results in the New South Wales HSC. Okay? Really high stakes, hegemonic curriculum structure. A few years ago, but still holds. What they found was that these are the factors that contributed. School background. Yes, a lot of the schools were established and had been there for a while. Subject faculty mattered. It was a faculty that was really focused on student learning and worked as a team, they found. The personal qualities. The teachers were all so kid-focused, it wasn't funny. It's about the kids. And they loved their subjects, that passion thing. That also, one problem with the study is they were all experienced in their subjects. So this goes to Hattie's work about experienced and novice that you may have seen in that earlier study. Okay? But we can learn from experienced teachers and what they do. It can it can quicken the move from novice to experienced. Okay? They all had positive relationship with students. They were not authoritarian. They were authoritative. Okay? They echo the stuff that Steve's been talking about. They all actively sought out professional development. They knew that their subjects were changing, teaching was changing, and they would be the first to go, right, I might be getting great results, but I need to keep learning to keep them there. Right? Resources and planning. They were well planned, they knew what they were going to teach, they had not necessarily lesson plans the way you will in the first year or so, but they had plans more than many teachers you will observe had. And they had resources that were their own, that met their students' needs, not an off-the-shelf resource. And number 7, teaching strategies. And this is what you need to go and read, because it's too much to go through here. They had a whole range of strategies they used in their class. What I want to say about it, though, is if you look down on this quote, and it's a rough grain because I just do a screenshot off the old text. Okay? Basically, they're saying that this last bit down the bottom here, you could imagine something like the HSC, which is so content dominated that these teachers be just exam cramming and pushing the exam. But no, what they found is the whole idea of the exam, and this is major end of year stuff, really important. It was there, but no, they taught their kids with interest and understanding for the subject, not the exam. This is what I want to come back to now with the QT research, okay, and some of the Hattie work. We think we get judged by exam results, so we want to make sure we maximise them by teaching the exam skills. Explicitly in the QT stuff there, and the work behind it, and explicitly in the Hattie stuff. What they find is that teachers that focus on the exam score lower on quality teaching when they measure it, and their kids achieve less. But teachers that focus on authentic teaching, their kids learn more, achieve more, and they score higher on those measures when you measure them. Okay? Norm McCullough, who is now at Macquarie Uni but was the head of research in the New South Wales department, looked at quality teaching, and they looked at this thing called the Quality Teaching Awards in New South Wales, which was before the model. And again, what they found was that these teachers that won these awards, they had professional portfolios, and Regina's going to talk about those this Savo. And but they focused on learning, they focused on conversations. They didn't take a standard, here's a resource, measure it, tick it off. They did it holistically with students' needs and students' backgrounds, okay? They integrated. It wasn't just a tick box process. So that's one worth having a look at as well. And the other one, sorry, that's sort of worth it. The other one I really recommend is Haberman's work, The Pedagogy of Poverty. And Deb Hayes' paper in the CPP references also has a similar thing. The idea here is that we have a view of what good teaching is that I've been talking about. And often it's encoded in those documents that I was mentioning. Pedagogy of poverty is that we know that standing there for a worksheet and doing this is not good teaching. Kids aren't going to learn much. But they're quiet and they're compliant. But we want them to learn more, so we change our teaching. We get them doing group work, activities, new things. The kids aren't used to that, so they go, this isn't teaching. Teaching is when I sit down and write notes off a board and I'm quiet, or write a worksheet. This teacher doesn't know what they're doing. Okay? So they start troubling what their view of good teaching is, the other side of Britzman's quote. You start seeing kids that aren't exactly doing what you want because they haven't been trained in how to do it, because you're breaking however many years of high school and primary school training. Then someone loses their nerve. Usually us. Because we go, well, this classroom is noisy and not actually doing what I want. Not good. I'll be judged poorly. Right, kids, here's notes, here's a worksheet. Oh, good, this is real teaching again. Quiet, sit down, they do their work. Right? And that cycle goes around. Pedagogy of poverty. In Hayes' work, one example is she follows students, and 6 lessons in a row, they're doing notes or worksheets. If you were doing 6 lessons in a row at school with notes and worksheets, how would you be feeling by the 4th or 5th or 6th? But you break the cycle, you change expectations, things change, someone loses their nerve. Susan Rice, for example, taking that earlier argument, says that some of those schools where that happens are challenging, or what Richard Teese calls schools that are condemned to innovate. Okay, disadvantaged schools, because you've got to do things differently. If you want kids to learn, you've got to do new things, Richard Teese talks about. For Susan Rice, it's about, well, yeah, what they found about these best teachers that scored high on a number of measures, was that they actively sought out those situations where it was going to be hard. And yeah, it was hard, but the reward that they received just kept them in their profession, and they moved on. Now, this is a different view of overcoming some of the disadvantages and professional challenges to that unitary discourse of standards and quality and measuring performance that we have on the other side of the coin. This is about professionalism, not about accountability. All right. Complex practice. 10 minutes, good. Charlotte used this paper in her Ed Foundations. Connell's Good Teachers on Dangerous Ground. But this has been a subtext of everything I've been saying till now. If the curriculum embodies a form of hegemonic knowledge, we interpret that, or we present it. But there's a form of interpretation. We interpret it to give it to students, and there might be a disconnect, or we interpret it for the students, so we take them and bring them to it. Now, we get into some stuff that Meg will talk about next semester there, about whether we change the system or work within it as cultural workers, so I don't want to go down that path. The key point is, it's complex, what you do. There's no one answer to go, let me take this and tick it off, because that only creates inequities. If pedagogy is that art and science of teaching, and authentic pedagogy is that individual craft, and productive pedagogy is recognised as helping students realise learning outcomes in a broader sense, then the idea of authentic productive pedagogy that comes from the Queensland work is where teachers adapt, select, use, recognise their students. This is what we're challenging you with. This is the theory practice bit that you do on prac. It's about authentic and productive pedagogy. It's real, it's productive because it achieves outcomes, it's that pedagogy / praxis idea, and it's about the students you're teaching. What it's not taking an atomised standards approach. So when you go and prac, your reports are not each one of these standards and all their subset. Okay? You will see that the standards are divided into domains there: professional knowledge, professional practice, professional engagement. These are the big subheadings. It's the knowledge you need, it's the skills you need to then show, and it's the engagement with the community and others. And they move on from graduate, proficient, highly accomplished to lead. You don't reach the graduate ones until after the course, at the end of the course. Everything we do here is mapped against these. They have to be for registration purposes. Your prac is not measured at graduate standards. It's measured before that. The end of the course is, but not the one you're on now. When you go out into schools, you've got 1 to 3 years, depending on the system, to meet proficient. You're not expected to show everything from the outset. You're learning. Okay? And if they want you to be competent, a lot of this language is about understand, know. Okay? It's not you have to go and show it. The old prac reports used to break down every one of those standards. So you would have 74 of these tick boxes as to how well you were going on each of those little standards. That's that atomising of practice that is utterly and totally irrelevant. But that's what's been generated by institutes in areas that surround our jurisdiction. Okay? The atomisation of practice under that logic or that unitary discourse of quality that standards come from that I was mentioning. We, with the ACU and the TQI, so you can see it's badged there as an official document, have this one, which you should have seen. Now, if you haven't looked at the documents and the reports on the Moodle site that you're using, you must, because you won't understand what's happening otherwise. Okay? But your beginning placement, you'll see that we've broken it up. And this has to work for you and undergrads, okay? So this one you're going on now is the beginning. You move in this one then to the intermediate. You guys do. My undergraduate colleagues, you are at the intermediate. You do 2 of those, okay? And then your final prac is at the final level. But we've taken the graduate standards and we've moved backwards from them to say, what can we expect you to do as someone in the grad dips here that have been doing education for 7 weeks? What can we expect of you? I want you to observe and look at the language. It's about observing, understanding, knowing. In intermediate, it's about knowing and playing. In final, it's about having a bit of a go and thinking about what you're doing and why. It's not competence. And you'll see that they're about the domain level: professional knowledge, professional practice, professional engagement. The report that you do reflects this. Okay? It's the same report. Okay? one document. You just do the same document many times. And that's where you show your development, your evolution of practice. Okay? And the only difference is the boxes you tick, whether it's CPP 1, 2, 3, beginning, intermediate, final, whether it's formative or final. Okay? The formative you do after about 10 days to see how you're going. The final after you've done the last bit of each stage, okay, as a record. But this is about not measuring you. It's about giving you feedback. It's based on the domains. So there's some instructions here. It's not each one of those tick boxes. It's, well, in professional knowledge, what's Simon showing based on that beginning level that he can do and understands? And then it's, what does he need to work on? We'll write that down there. That provides a basis for you for reflection and ongoing development. Even when it's the final one, I'm going to come back to the end. Even when it's the final one, it's still developmental, heading towards your next prac, okay, or your final prac. It's based on the idea of professional conversations, and this is central. And this was a project done with us and the ACU last semester in a number of schools here, where it's about a conversation between you and your mentor using that domain level to give you some feedback on where you're at and where you got to go. And the idea of professional conversations is, again, to deliberately get rid of that unitary discourse idea, to get rid of that atomization, to bring it together. Now, as Simon said in a post last week, schools are different. So some of you are after a degree of certainty about days, numbers, lessons, whatever. Because it's contextual and based around conversations, that's why that is not there, because it would be wrong 99% of the time if we did it. But if you understand that we're talking here about complex practice at domain levels, based on conversations in context, and if there's any fuzziness on the edges, then your academic mentors can help interpret. But it's reflecting complexity to overcome those counterproductive discourses that are out there. And there are some suggestions as a conversation that you might use. But again, you need to look at the documents. That's the basis of it. That's the reason why it is the way it is, and that's the general overview of the practice.